welcome. My name is Lloyd Borrell. I'm your host. Today, I'm thrilled to have as my guest, Mr. Oram Miller. Oram Miller is a certified building biology environmental consultant and electromagnetic radiation specialist. He is the Director of Learning and Development for the Institute of Building Biology and Ecology, and is involved in curriculum development and teaching for EMF seminars taught by the Institute. He provides on-site healthy home and office EMF evaluations for clients throughout Southern California who have electromagnetic sensitivities, as well as those who want a healthier home or office. I really want to get on to talking about solutions, but before that, I'd like to ask you about 5G, because, 5G, the fifth generation of cellular technology, there's a lot of talk about this, the millimeter waves and how dangerous it's going to be, and there's a lot of fear out there, which is justified, not justified, but that's my question. So what can we say about 5G and its dangers and what we can do?
Okay. Thanks. It's important to talk about this because this is what's on people's minds right now, because we're moving into that worldwide. So I actually am researching this topic for a paper that I've been asked by my profession to develop, so I'm developing a draft that will be a consensus document among all of the faculty, the engineers, and I'm not an engineer, but my colleagues who are the principal teachers are. So we're going to come out with that on our building biology website, which is hbelc.org, www.hbelc.org. That's the website for the Building Biology Institute in North America. So we'll have that sometime in the next few months, and it's now June that we're taping this interview. So basically, my understanding of 5G is that every 10 years or so, there's another generation that evolves in cell phone technology, and that's what 5G stands for, is fifth generation. Not to be confused with 5 gigahertz, or 5.8 gigahertz to be more precise, which is one of the frequencies that is unregulated by the FCC in North America. So we had 2.4 gigahertz, and now we have 5.8 gigahertz. And so you have a 2.4 and 5G, 2.4G and 5G on your router, and people are thinking, I have 5G already. And that's what it's not. No, you don't have 5G yet. 5G hasn't come out yet, although they're beta testing it as of last year and this year. The plan is to shift into it in 2019, 2020, full scale. So 1G was voice only. 2G was voice plus text. 3G, which was 20 years later, was the beginning of data, where you could look at a website and get email on your phone. That was 3G, third generation. That was 20 years ago. Then fourth generation, 4G, was faster data and more callers at the same time, more data throughput, faster download speeds, and LTE was even a bump in all of that. And that's where we are now. We have 4G LTE, but we still use 2G and 3G for voice and some of the data. If you don't have 4G coverage, you'll go to 3G. You'll see that on your phone. So when we go to 5G, we're not going to get rid of 4G. In other words, the same frequencies that are being used for fourth generation will still be used. Now, the reason why we're moving into the millimeter band, and what even is that? The millimeter band is the part of the spectrum that is up above where we are now. So where we are now is generally for cell technology, it's generally 800, 900 megahertz, clustered around those two numbers. So if you go to antennasearch.com, and you put in your address, and I think I'm sure there's a European version of this, but in North America, you can type in antennasearch.com, put in your address, you'll get two reports. You should click on the antenna report first, not the tower. Look at that later, but the antenna is for the active transmitting antennas. Now, don't freak out by all the icons that come up, because they're not all cell towers. The majority of them are not. The majority of them are low power transmitters or even microwave towers that are point to point between satellite dishes. There are some cell towers in there that broadcast at 800 to 1,000 watts. That's the typical strength of the signal from a 4G cell antenna, which has about 120 degrees from left to right. If this is the center point out from the cell antenna, it's 60 degrees to the left and 60 degrees to the right, and it's fixed and it's constant. at least as a base, there's an ambient baseline, and it just goes. It just goes out there. Now, if there are people who connect, then there's more activity, but there's always a baseline. But it's not pulled. It doesn't get stronger if you turn on your cell phone, at least in terms of your end, necessarily. But I'll get to that. There's a misunderstanding about that. With beamforming, there will be. That's coming, and I'll get to that. So we have 4G towers, and they have about 12 gates per antenna for people to connect to. Now that's massive in, massive out, or I'm sorry, multiple in, multiple out. They're 12 ports. They're going to massive MIMO or massive MIMO, which means 100 ports with a lot more data. They're able to do that. That's one of the technologies that's going to allow them to increase the number of callers per cell antenna at any given time. The reason why this is all necessary is because if you take a step back and look at it, the big thing that we have to do with the 5th generation technology, I mean, we're trying to stop it, and I don't know that that's going to happen, but at least we need to bring it to people's attention and help them become aware of the health effects. So anyway, this is the technology as we understand it. So what's happening is people around the world are shifting their habits from fixed using computers to using their handheld devices for everything, not just for phone calls and texts, but for looking things up on the web, for surfing, for streaming, and not just audio, video. The amount of the bandwidth that you need just to live stream something from the cloud on video, watching a football game or whatever, is huge. The average picture is 5 megs. I know we have the computing power and we have the memory to handle all that, but yeah, Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, you start sharing your photos. These are 5 meg photos going all over the place. It's huge. So the amount of bandwidth that's been necessary has gone like that. And it's completely maxing out the existing technology of 4G with the cell towers that we have now between the towers and your phone. So they're massive. They're scrambling. They've been doing this for several years. They've been seeing this coming, and it's getting to the point where they have to expand into a part of the spectrum that they haven't used before for cell phones. And this is called the millimeter band. And the reason it's above 10 gigahertz. And that would be starting at, 24 gigahertz to 96 gigahertz. Now that's a portion of the band where the military has used that for decades. Satellite companies have used that for decades. So if you have satellites in geostationary orbit, 22,000 miles above the equator, with their footprint down covering half of a continent, say from Hawaii to St. Louis, to the central part of the United States, that whole area is being bathed in these millimeter frequencies and has been for decades. You have that if you walk out in the desert or in the Grand Canyon. You've got that coming down anywhere you are, in the ocean, everywhere, mostly on land. But that's why you need a parabolic dish, which concentrates and focuses those signals that are coming in very weak in parallel, hitting not a flat surface, but a parabolic surface, focusing them up to a point. And that's where the arm is of the receiver to receive that signal. And then it gets amplified and goes down the coaxial cable. It's not a matter of pulling in more signal when you turn on your TV. That's not how it works. It's just there, and it's very weak. And you have it taking a walk out in your yard. It's always there. So, but the same frequencies will be used. And the problem is, as the frequency goes up to 24 to 96 gigahertz, which is 24 to 96 billion cycles per second, the wavelength gets smaller and smaller the further up you go. That's how it works. It's inversely related. The lower you go on the spectrum, the larger the wavelength. So I told you that 900 megahertz, which is the frequency of many cell phones and smart meters, has a wavelength of about 13 inches. 2.4 gigahertz, which is faster, has a wavelength of 5 inches. 13 inches for 900 megahertz for smart meters and some cell phones. Wi-Fi at 2.4 gigahertz is 5 inches. Well, when you get up to 10 gigahertz and 20 gigahertz and 30 gigahertz and 50 and 90, then it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And now you're down to millimeters, like a half an inch. So 2, 3, 4 millimeters. That's why they call it the millimeter band. So the situation with the millimeter band is when you get above 10 gigahertz and you get into 20, 30, 50, 96 gigahertz, you're dealing with frequencies that have a wavelength that is just millimeters, a quarter of an inch. And the physics of it are that wavelength does not penetrate building materials. Again, let alone shielding materials that we're familiar with, it won't even go through a wood wall or brick or stucco. That's why you cannot put your satellite dish in the attic under the roof. If the roof is here, or you have a tree out in the yard and you have your satellite dish under that roof, you can't get that satellite signal from space. You have to put the satellite here, because just a simple plywood roof decking with shingle, asphalt shingle on top, will block the gigahertz millimeter, the higher gigahertz millimeter wavelength and frequency and wavelength that they used for satellite TV, which is the same wavelengths that are in this millimeter band that they're going to use. So the only reason why they're going up there is because there's a lot of space available, and they have some technologies that they're going to incorporate to help a signal get through your wall. And so one of them is called beamforming. Beamforming is the process of taking little antennas, little transmitters in the transmitter and aggregating them and then focusing it and then moving it around. So these new small cell antennas, and I believe new cell antennas on towers and devices inside of your building, fixed devices like routers and such, will have this capability of moving the antenna around. It's called beamforming. And so the beamforming will allow focusing and amplification of the strength of the signal to penetrate through the wood wall. That's what they say. Now, here's the thing. When I saw that, when I read that, I thought, So everyone's worried about the small cell antenna that's going to be out in front of their home. They say, so in a 5G world, assuming it isn't stopped, let's just assume that for a moment in our discussion here. There are great efforts underway to try and do that, to try and stop it. And I support all that. And we do in the building biology profession. But for those people who want to know, well, what happens if it does go through, or they're already beta testing it in my city, which is happening. So here's what a 5G world would look like. So what you'll have is these new small cell antennas in front of homes, and they're going to be looking for people to connect with. But in addition to that, there's another facet of 5G, which is adding faster download and some of these technologies, all of these technologies in the devices you bring into your home. New routers will be 5G, smart speakers like Google Home and with Alexa and all these things, the Nest and Ecobee and other Honeywell thermostats, all the thermostats, and even and your tablet. And now we won't have smartphones right away. A couple of companies are working on 5G phones, which will be thicker, and they're going to run the battery down very quickly. So they're working on that. But most phones will be 4G for a while. But the point is, what that's going to involve is faster download speeds, and there will be this connection in the millimeter band to the small cell antenna outside. Although the router, ultimately, your router still is going to connect to the service that you have now, which is through your telephone company or your cable company, and that's through coaxial cables and telephone lines that come into your house. So that's not going to change. It's just that you're going to be adding faster download speeds, and the cell towers that are in existence now, the 4G cell towers that are at 800, 900 megahertz, 1800, 1900 megahertz, they're going to continue to exist. So as you walk down the street, you'll be handed off from a regular 4G tower, and then you go to a small cell here, and then you turn a corner, and now that goes away. So you have to go back to another cell tower that's over there, and then then you go back by a building, and you're handed off to another small cell antenna. You're going to be hopped back and forth from large to small antenna. It's part of a network that's all focused, and they're going to ricochet things, and because many more people are going to be able to be accommodated at the same time with massive MIMO, massive multiple in, multiple out. Instead of 12 ports per large fixed cell antennas, you're going to have 100. And then also with full duplex. Full duplex is a technology that allows two people to share the same frequency and bypass each other here because of silicon transistors or something that's going to allow that. So they're going to be able to put, because right now they're using two frequencies for people to talk to each other, or one frequency and one waits and the other, it's like a walkie-talkie. It's so fast you don't realize it. They're going to be able to get more traffic with this full duplex. So what they're doing is making 4G frequencies faster and 4G transmitters faster. So there's more biological harm from that. And then they're adding the signals from them in the gigahertz range, which will primarily be for the backhaul. In the millimeter band, it's going to be primarily for the backhaul, which is to get you the data from different things, from these antennas to the network, so they can then hop onto another network to talk to the person you're talking to. That's the backhaul, what people need to understand, Lloyd, as far as I'm concerned, and my profession is concerned, and others who have looked at this in detail. The thing is, it's not like we're like, okay, kind of okay here, and then we're all of a sudden going to go here to this biosphere killing. It's going to be terrible. I mean, that's not wrong. It's just that we're not here. We're here already. We're massively overexposed with 4G and LTE as it is. And people who call me up who are so worried about the cell tower out down the street, and they say, well, let's go in the backyard and measure what that actually produces. Oh, it's pointing the other way, and you have 150 microwatts per meter squared in your backyard. We go in the house, their Wi-Fi router, their cordless telephone base, it's screaming at 160 to 500,000 microwatts. Their cell phone, and I'm showing them this. And I got a father here in Los Angeles who says, well, you convinced me to move my daughter's, the router for the house out of the closet next to her bedroom, and I'm going to put it in the garage. We're good now, right? I said, well, you're halfway there, but why do you need the Wi-Fi to stay on? Why not go hardwire? He said, oh, because she uses it for her laptop in the afternoon. She does her homework on her bed with her laptop. I said, sure, she uses Wi-Fi, right? He said, yeah, but I'm putting the router in the garage. So I said, do you realize that the laptop in her lap is as strong a transmitter? It's more intermittent, not continuous, but it's still as strong as the router you moved, that I convince you is harmful and dangerous, that you need to move to the garage. Oh, I didn't think about that. People have no concept of the personal devices. And then when I turn on my meter, my HF 59 gigahertz solutions high frequency detector, it's making a lot of noise and showing high numbers from their phones and all these devices close to them. And they had no concept. They think it's all the harm is coming from the smart meter outside, the cell tower outside, the small cell that's coming with 5G outside, and all these things that are close to them. They literally say to me, Aram, that's my phone. We can't talk about my phone. You have to help me about that with that cell tower down the street. I'm so worried about it. Or they say to me, you don't understand, Aram. This is the only way that the moms and I communicate with each other. We can't communicate with the corded telephone, the corded landline to the telephone, and the corded Ethernet computer. I text. That's how we text each other for our play dates for our kids. And I see it. I'm there all day, and she's got this. It's just texting all day long right next to her. And she's sensitive. And I can't convince her to not use it. She said, well, let's do everything else, but I have to have this with me. Okay? And I just want to show you how strong this thing is. All right, so that's where we're at already. We're already there. We have supersaturation and ill health for all the reasons that all these other guests that you've had on, the researchers have told us. So 5G is just going to be more. It's going to be the same thing we have now, which is totally bad, on steroids, adding more to it, especially in an urban environment. So if you're electrically sensitive, rural areas will not get this right away. That's actually written in the literature from the Wired magazines and Fiercely Wireless and other websites that are talking about the 5G with great excitement. They're saying that the investment is very high for these installations, and the companies are not going to be doing rural areas right away. It's urban areas that they're doing first. So here's what I would say to an electrically sensitive person about 5G. First of all, realize that it's bad as it is now, really bad now, and you have to pay attention to your sources of RF in your house right now from wireless sources and get on that, number one. And also look, number two, just as important from a building biology standpoint for everybody, you must pay attention to this. look at the electric fields and magnetic fields and dirty electricity as well as the RF. You have to look at all four. Very, very crucial. Hire a building biologist, and look at our websites. Get meters. The Tri-Field, Alpha Labs has come out with the Tri-Field TF2. Wonderful meter. I love it. Because for the first time, the 100XC, the black box with the brown cover with the analog needle, wasn't sensitive enough for electric and radio frequencies. They've fixed that. It's very sensitive now for both, all three. And they even have a standard mode, which is the same thing as the flat response model that they had, which doesn't give you the exaggeration that you have for magnetic fields with the frequency response model, which is the model you get if you don't ask for anything otherwise. And that's called weighted on their new model. And it's 3-axis, and they have a hold feature at the top. I mean, it's a great little meter. It has sound for how strong, so you can tell what's going on without having to look at it, because you can hear the clicking go up. So you've reviewed it, and it's a great little meter. And also the Cornet ED88T Plus is a great little meter as well. So we're really doing well for affordable, less than $200 combination meters from those two companies. And also, Alistair Phillips has come out with he has the Acousticom 2, which is an affordable version of the Acoustimeter, and he has his pocket electric and magnetic field meter. Those are great. And then also, Rob Metzinger at Safe Living Technologies has just come out with a $160 RF meter that covers up to 8 to 10 gigahertz as well. And so that's on the market at Safe Living Technologies. So, okay. Now, the thing is, you can't measure the millimeter circuits or frequencies with any of these meters, because the maximum they go up to is 8 gigahertz or 10 at the most. With the Gigahertz Solutions HF59G, I think it is. Now, there's a guy here in California, Trevor Marshall, who is and by the time this comes out in this autumn of 2018, he might have it on the market, but he said he has a design for an EMF radio frequency sniffer, as he calls it. It's a little device that will alert you when there are frequencies in the gigahertz millimeter band range. Because to measure them with current equipment, you're talking about a $20,000 NARDA RF meter. I mean, there are antennas on the market that you can put on a NARDA, but the NARDAs are $5,000 to $20,000 each, and these antennas are expensive. And as Peter Cirk and I realized, he's a building biologist in San Diego, California, who's an RF expert, they go from 300 megahertz to 24 or 96 gigahertz, but you don't know where you are in that range. You could be picking up stuff at this end that's still, everything that we talked about with 4G is above 300 megahertz. So it's not accurate. It's not specific enough. But Trevor's little sniffer, what he's waiting on is for industry to focus on, to settle on frequencies that they will use. So T-Mobile, Sprint, Verizon, and AT&T are all beta testing in different cities around the world these different components, and they're going to see what works. So whatever works best, they're going to be focusing on those, and that is what he will then program his sniffer to look for. So in order to give the accuracy and keep the cost down, he has to focus on a relatively narrow band. Now, one more point I want to make here. Paul McGavin, who's an EMF consultant and activist in Northern California, told me on the phone a few weeks ago, the cell companies really don't want to go into the millimeter range if they don't have to. They want to stay in the low to mid gigahertz range. And what I mean by low, I'm talking about 600, 700, 800, 900 megahertz, which is 0.6, 0.7, 0.8 gigahertz. T-Mobile just got 600 megahertz at auction recently. AT&T got 2,500 megahertz. These are frequencies that go through walls easily, but here's the thing. We can measure them and we can shield against them. It's no different than what we already have, okay? Not that that's good and 5G is bad. 5G is just a protocol that's going to include all of this stuff. And so the thing is, he said that that's where they really want to stay, because they can get enough data downloaded with these massive MIMO and full duplex and other technologies that are going to speed up and increase the number of people who, and beamforming even with that. But the point is, he said that the military in America is holding on to this spectrum. They're not even using it all. They're holding on to it just for future use. And the government is releasing that to the cell phone carriers, and they're putting it. The FCC is auctioning that off, and so that's where they really want to go there. So we're seeing activity in those ranges. So 5G honestly has more to do with faster download speeds at existing frequencies that we already have, that we can measure and that we can shield against. And they're reluctantly going into the gigahertz range. That will be there, but mostly for backhaul, although there will be some connection to your cell phone with that. And then the third component of 5G is all these faster download speeds and adding the millimeter band backhaul in the higher gigahertz range for the fixed devices and portable devices you have in your home. So if you're an electrically sensitive person, here's what I recommend you do. Don't have wireless devices in your home for two reasons. One, because you won't get that souped up version of what's already bad now with Wi-Fi at 2.4 and 5 gigahertz is bad enough, although it's only 1 to 3 watts. So it drops off relatively quickly in the room. You get 6 or 8 or 10 feet away, and it's down to, less than 50 microwatts per meter squared. And if you get in the next room, it might be, closer to, you get far enough away from it, it'll be down around less than 10 microwatts per meter squared, which is relatively safe for most people. Now, if you're electrically sensitive, that's still too high, and I respect that. But then you need shielding of your house.
Yes.
Okay, but for people who live in families, and I have a lot of clients who are like this, 60 to 70% of my clients are sensitive to some degree, but only a handful of them are so sensitive that they can't have any of this around them. The rest, they say they're electrically sensitive, and they are. I believe them, but they're still willing to use their cell phone, and they've got husbands who have no concept of this. They're not on board. They want to sit on the couch. I just had this discussion with a naturopath yesterday who's sensitive, but her husband says, her husband says, I don't believe in any of this, and I want to use my iPhone to check my email while we're watching TV on the couch, sitting right next to her. I said, well, that's toxic for you. And she uses her own iPhone and iPad. Now, we have a hardwired workaround with that, which involves just a simple Lightning to Ethernet adapter. Yes. But then you have to use grounded, shielded Cat6, Cat7 Ethernet cables, and this great little invention that Sean Cranish at ElectraHealth came up with, which is a Ethernet grounding adapter kit, which you plug in a little short grounded Ethernet Cat6, Cat7 with a metal on it, not plastic, on the two ends, into your router. And then there's a coupler that he has with jacks on both ends in metal that he has a ground wire to, and you plug it into the ground prong of your outlet. And then you have to plug a shielded Cat6, Cat7 cord the rest of the way, which can be 25, 50 feet if you want, 100 feet. And it's only $10. And then you plug that into this Lightning to Ethernet adapter, and voila, you can put your iPhone or iPad, not Android, into airplane mode, and you'll still connect, and you won't have any electric field on top of that, which you'd have if you had the plastic cord, because that conveys the electric field from the router, which has a 2-prong plug on it, which has no ground. So you're taking care of 2 EMFs at the same time. Yeah. Because when you plug in when you put even a laptop, you put it in airplane mode or turn off the Wi-Fi, and the new MacBooks are very thin. So we have USB-C to Ethernet adapters. We have Thunderbolt and USB to Ethernet adapters. If you plug in a regular Ethernet cable with plastic ends that's not grounded, and you don't have your power cord on there, which is grounded in many cases, and so you're floating, and you put the laptop in airplane, turn off the Wi-Fi, you have gotten rid of that EMF, that radio frequency EMF. But you've introduced an electric field EMF coming up the cord. So that's why we have this shielded Cat6, Cat7 Ethernet cable along with that Ethernet grounding adapter kit. And one more thing, if you have a Mac or a PC, you want the plug to be grounded
Yeah, excellent information on the 5G, excellent information on the EMF meters, of course. Yeah, the new Tri-Field and the new meter from Safe Living Technologies, also, which I've not had a chance to test yet, but it's very good too. And what you're saying about the 5G is, what we can say anyway, is it's another complication in the EMF world. And it's another layer of EMF pollution. And the rest,
absolutely,
we don't really know, do we? Because in terms of the biological effects, we don't really know, because we don't really have the science yet. But great information there, and about the broad, about the beamforming technology, which you spoke about, which I've not heard about before. So what I'd like to ask you about, because we're running out of time, and so I'd like to move on to solutions a little bit. Talk about shielding, because a lot of times what I've noticed is when people suddenly become aware of EMFs, it's like, oh my God, I've got to shield. And so if I was to say there was a very deep desire, that would be an understatement. But so in my book, shielding is not always the most appropriate course of action. And that's what I want to ask you is, when do we shield and how do we shield? When is it appropriate? And particularly with regard to radio, because there's different shielding, of course, but in terms of wireless, radio frequency radiation, microwave radiation, in terms of shielding for that. If you could answer that question, please.
Absolutely. So you just brought up an important point right at the end of your question, Lloyd, and that is there are different types of shielding for different types of EMFs. So first of all, shielding for magnetic fields is expensive and relatively ineffective because magnetic fields migrate and creep around the edges of your shielding. So you have to have the shielding wide enough so that whatever you measure, this is what Alec, what's his name? De Toffel.
Emil De Toffel. That's CMF.
I can't remember his name for some reason right now.
Yeah, Emil De Toffel.
Emil. What he says on his website is you have to measure in like a grid, like 1 foot by 1 foot grid, and whatever you measure on the outside of where the perimeter of your shielding, that's the level you're going to have here. We're right opposite the breaker panel that you're trying to shield from. Now, and that only works if you have enough space around that breaker panel to shield. Now, what if the source is towards the floor? You're out of luck because that field is going to come through the earth, literally, if you're on a slab on grade construction, or through the basement. You've got it's just not easy to do. I've had half a dozen clients who insisted on trying it, and I told them it's not going to work. And in every case, it failed, except a minor reduction. So distance is your friend. That's the good thing. With point source magnetic fields like transformers, motors, breaker panels, it's very strong, but it drops off exponentially. So within a few feet or a meter or so, you're in a good range. Now, shielding for electric fields is effective, but it needs to be grounded. If it's floating, it won't work. Now, I had I mentioned this client yesterday who was laying on an earthing mat and had an amplification of the electric field coming from the Romex in the walls because the sheet wasn't grounded. And even if you ground that earthing mat, you need to shut off the breakers, which we do anyway. There's a test that we do in our building biology EMF evaluations of a home where the client will lay on the bed with a walkie-talkie in one hand and the electric body voltage meter in the other. And then I'm in the basement or garage or outside flipping the breakers and determining which circuits raise that number. And those are the circuits we turn off at night, and then they sleep better. You can see that in comments from clients on my website. Now, or you can use an electric field meter like the TF2 from Tri-Field, or the Cornet in the electric field mode, or Gigahertz Solutions electric field meters, some of which they're all single axis, so you have to be a little careful about that. But then, you have to check at that pillow, where the chest would be, where the pelvis would be, where the feet would be, to make sure that those levels are all low and ideally below 1.5 volts per meter from a building biology standpoint for a good, healthy night's sleep. or below 100 millivolts with the body voltage meter. But so if you want to shield, you can do that, but you have to ground that shielding. And by the way, it's very important to remember that the cotton material that Swiss Shield sells for Daylight and Naturel, which is often used as a bed canopy material, you can't ground that. That the silver threads that are embedded in that cotton, when you put a clamp on it, you can't get to the silver thread that's inside that copper or that cotton sheathing. So they say the Safe Living Technologies is very clear to say to their customers who are buying this for RF canopies, you cannot eliminate electric fields with this. You can't ground it like you can with our polyester, like Argent Mesh and these other materials that we sell for bed canopies. Now, the problem is if you are trying to reduce your EMFs and you get I'm not complaining here about the Swiss Shield company, but if you use that product and you're reducing your RF, it's very effective for that as a bed canopy material. But if you're not shutting the breakers off as well, any fabric that's not grounded will increase the electric fields because it's floating and it's like an antenna that amplifies that electric field. So when it comes to radio frequency shielding, you can do one of two things. You can get a canopy or you can get shielding for your walls, and that can be with paint or with fabric. And you also have windows. To shield RF from windows, you can use the transparent film, Radiaclear, Scotch Tint. You can use the metal mesh window screen, and you can have a handyman build you a frame to go over the part of the window that doesn't have a screen and put a metal screen in that and take out the vinyl and put a metal screen here on the part that you open, and you have screen on both sides or, top and bottom, however it's arranged. And that's a pretty effective shield because that's a hole in the wall. It just lets the RF right through. We have a lot of stucco out here in Southern California, so that blocks the RF just 70, 80% on its own, but the window just lets it right through. So we have to use the film, metal mesh insect screen, and then even curtains, a veil shield and other transparent curtain material. Or if you want to pull curtains across at night, then you can put Argent Mesh or Swiss Shield or anything you want on the back of the curtain, and that'll add to your protection from your windows. So if someone is electrically sensitive, EHS or electrically hypersensitive, and different EHS people are sensitive to different types of EMFs. Some are really super sensitive to electric fields, it's 60 or 50 hertz. Some are super sensitive to Wi-Fi. Some are super sensitive to direct electricity. You have to find out what their sensitivity is, but you reduce all of them if you can. But with RF, if you're going to go to the expense of painting your room, you have to have a safe room, or at least your bedroom should be this way, or spending $1,000 for a bed canopy, and you don't pay attention to the router in your house and the cordless phone base unit and the cell phone and the tablet and all this, and your husband's watching, reading the sports scores inside the bed canopy, well, that RF is going to be reflected off the inside of your room and concentrate because you have reflective surfaces there. So you have to pay attention to all of this. And let's see, what else? Oh, one more thing. There's a client that I have who had a laptop inside their bed canopy. And, it had a grounded plug, but it was plugged into an outlet that had a 2-prong plug with no ground because it was a 1950s building. And they had a 3-to-2 adapter. And so there was no ground, and we had huge electric fields coming off of the material. But the RF was low, but they weren't measuring electric fields. So you have to pay attention to all of these things. Okay.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah. So, and in my position is with the shielding, you can't just go willy-nilly into ideally, we'd call in Orem Miller or somebody, a building biologist, somebody
all over the world
who understands this. Yeah. But then that's not always possible. And so we can just go out and buy the shielding material, but in my opinion, that's not a good idea because we can actually make matters worse.
Well, as long as
we should always have an EMF meter on hand whenever we do any shielding. What's your position?
Exactly. Agreed. You have to have a meter. Even people who hire us, I want them to have meters. I want to teach them how to use them properly, and I want them to pay attention to this. Now, again, the more people on the planet have the Tri-Field XL 100, XE100 meter than any other meter in the world. Yeah. So a lot of people will measure electric fields in their bedroom. I'm sorry, they'll measure EMFs in their bedroom with a Gauss meter and say, well, I have none. Well, usually you don't on a second story bedroom, because the wiring errors don't produce magnetic fields when the lights are off, right? And secondly, so it's a daytime issue primarily, and an evening issue when the lights are on. And most wiring errors are in lighting circuits, occasionally also in receptacle circuits. But then the current on the water pipe, which we have here in the States and Canada, is on the ground floor. It's not upstairs. So you don't have magnetic fields where you sleep. And so the Gauss meter is usually low in 95% of the cases. But the electric field is always high. And they're missing that because they're not measuring for it, unless they say, but I did measure for it, Orem. I have a Tri-Field. And I put it on the electric and the radio frequencies, and those are low, so I'm good. Well, it turns out it's not sensitive enough. And Alpha Labs, to their credit, they knew that. And their new meter, the TF2, takes care of that. And that meter is accurate for all three. And because on the second floor, you're going to pick up some more cell activity coming in, because on the ground floor, you have neighboring buildings blocking the cell signal coming from the neighborhood cell tower. I always find higher RF coming in from outside through the windows and the wall from cell towers on the second floor, because you don't have the buildings around you to the same degree. So they're going to miss that. So with the new RF, the new TF2 from Tri-Field and the Cornet ED88T, that's always been very sensitive and good for RF, the 78S and the ED88T, and now the ED88T Plus has sound for RF, which actually, one difference between that and the Tri-Field TF2, the TF2 will give you a clicking as the numbers go up with any of the three EMFs, magnetic, electric, or radio, but you don't actually hear the radio signal. Whereas with the Cornet and the Gigahertz Solutions RF meters, the HF35C, HFE35C, and so on, you actually hear, and also the Acoustimeter and Acousticom 2, excellent sound qualities with those meters, and including the Cornet ED88T Plus, which has a speaker, and you can turn the sound on and you can hear routers. You can tell what's in the room or what's coming in. Routers sound like a helicopter. A cordless telephone base unit has a certain hum to it. A Bluetooth has another steady hum and a different sound. Cell towers have a high-pitched squeal. We're all familiar with that. And if the speaker's not so good on the ED88T Plus, it has an earphone jack. Put an earphone in, and you'll hear it really well.
Gizmos, quick fixes. So from where I'm sitting, I've tried all the quick fixes and none of them work for me. That's not to say that some of them don't work, but I have... we have to be careful, very, very careful on this question. So I just want to ask you, what is your position on this? I know that the Building Biology Institute have published a paper on this. So if you could give some guidance on this question, please.
Sure. And it's an important one because chips and pendants are one of the four solutions or topics that people know about from the general EMF safety community websites. Dirty electricity, fifth generation cell technology, 5G, cell towers, smart meters, earthing mats, and then these chips and pendants. That's what most people are aware of out there. And then the building biology profession adds the two more, electric fields and magnetic fields in homes and from the home wiring and from power lines outside. So I'm asked this question literally every week, several times in the week. I see patients, I see the clients 6 days a week. including patients of healthcare practitioners who refer people to me. So the question of these chips and pendants and home harmonizers comes up because the claim is made by these companies that there are benefits to using them, that there are many people who feel better from them, and that's true. There are many people who do feel improvement. And then there are explanations about how they work that have to do with such things as frequencies, biological frequencies, Schumann frequencies. There are different mats that produce this. There are different devices that you hold on different parts of your body. The health profession has gotten into this, and so these healthcare practitioners who refer people to me, they notice improvement in their patients and clients from these technologies. But what we find is that there are also electric fields that are very high when you're laying on a mat that is not grounded. But we're not opposed to using chips and pendants and home harmonizers. If you feel better with them, the evidence does show that there is health benefits. Go ahead and use them adjunctive to the approaches that we use, that we recommend. And then when you're out of the house, we say, then hold the cell phone away from you, increase distance, use an air tube earphone with plastic in the last 6 inches. Have a case over that phone, because if you have it anywhere near your body, that phone is sending out a signal every minute or two, because there's an electronic handshake that occurs between the tower and the phone, which is going to be on steroids now with 5G. And every time a download, so if a download comes your way, an upgrade, a download, a text, an email, the tower sends a signal that says, I have a message for you, for this phone. And the phone sends back a signal that says I'm ready. That's a transmission, and then that you get a burst of radio frequencies, and that affects it. Then the download comes, there's no harm. Then there's another message that says, I got it. So the tower releases it because it knows that it was successfully delivered. 2 transmissions in the act of receiving. And it's right into your body, and people, men and women put these things in all sorts of parts of their body, and there are tumors in all those parts that are evident. So as a result, so you need to hold it away from your body and put it in a case which doesn't block it altogether, or else the cell signal wouldn't connect. But you can reduce it anyway, and so you can minimize the effect. And then you can put a chip on there too, because there are many people who feel better with those chips on there, but just hold it away. So the chips, pendants, and home harmonizers have a place. We don't say that they're worthless. Some of my colleagues do, but I don't, because I have too many people who tell me they feel better, so I can't discount it. I just encourage anyone who asks me, and as you have, to incorporate them as part of the overall comprehensive mitigation plan, which starts with reducing and minimizing sources, and then getting rid of current on your water pipes, getting rid of current on your TV cable sheathing, the magnetic fields that are caused by those. Reduce the electric fields where you sleep, reduce ground the computers that you put your hands on, and then go hardwired, and make sure that you have an RF meter and you really have scoured your house to find any hidden RF sources, and you have to try and get hardwired alternatives for those. And then take care of the dirty electricity by eliminating sources. There are different filter technologies that are available. Utilize those. And the chips and pendants have their place. If you feel better, go ahead and use them. Just do all this other stuff too.
So great summary there. And so EMF chips and pendants, so why not? But it's the rigorous EMF protection, which you've talked about at length here today, which is the most important thing, and that's where we start. And then we look at the EMF chips, pendants, etc.
Or in parallel.
Yeah. Please, go on.
Yeah, you could use them at the same time. It's just don't use the chips and pendants to the exclusion of this other stuff. That's all.
Exactly. Oren Miller, thank you so much.
You're welcome, Lloyd. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's great information. And as I said before we started, I couldn't do the summit without having you as a guest. So I'm very happy being able to share. I love your energy. I love your passion. And
yours as well.
Thank you for all the work you're doing, all the great work you're doing, and all the hip people that you're helping with this.
You're welcome, Lloyd. Thanks to you for all the work that you do to spread this knowledge to so many people around the world. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, sir. And for all you who've joined us today, thank you for being part of this movement. Stay tuned for the next session. My name is Lloyd Borrell. Thank you so much. Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.